5 million?
You're like me.
Numbers
I go right
are
on.
not even,
Well,
they are indeed. All right. As it's 7 o'clock, we'll call the meeting to order, the Planning and Zoning Commission. At this time, we have a quorum of 4 members, but both the chair and the vice chair are absent. So Mr. Plakowicz has graciously accepted the duty of chairman for the evening, and I turn it over to Mr. Plakowicz.
there we go, yeah. Okay, as chair of the evening, I'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Thank you.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome all to the meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission. Next item on the agenda is any additions or deletions. Does any commissioner have any matters to be added or deleted? If not, staff?
No, sir.
Okay, we'll proceed with the agenda as written. Item 3A is approval of the minutes of February 24, 2022. Do we have a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
Mr. Landers moved. Do we have a second?
A second.
Mr. Stewart, second. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, that motion carries. Item 3B on the agenda is the March 10, 2022 meeting minutes. Do we have a motion with respect to those minutes?
So moved.
Mr. Landers moved approval. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Stewart, second. Any discussion? All in favor, please signify by aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, that motion carries. That brings us to item 4A, which is not a matter on consent, and that is as follows: the Preserve at Waterway Village Phase 2 Pod X. Request for preliminary PD plan plat approval for 161 units, consisting of 32 villas and 129 single-family homes. Pulte Home Company, LLC is the owner. Kotler and Hearing, Inc., and Kimberly Horn Associates, Inc. are the agents. It's located on the southern half of the preserve, which is more specifically located at the southeast corner of the intersection of 43rd Avenue and 53rd Street. Zoning is PD, Plan Development. The land use designation is L2, which is low-density residential, up to 6 units per acre. The density as proposed is 2.26 units per acre. This is a quasi-judicial matter, so we'll begin with, has anybody had any ex parte communications, separate investigations, or know of any other reason why they cannot consider this matter on the facts and on the law? Hearing none, we'll ask the clerk to swear in anybody who plans to testify in this matter.
Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, and we'll start with county staff.
Mr. Chair, Patrick Murphy will be presenting. Thank you, Mr. Sweeney. As earlier stated, the first item on the agenda tonight is the Preserve at Waterway Village Phase 2 Pod X preliminary plan plat. As you see on the screen above you, on the location map, this Pod X is located at the northeast corner of 49th Street and 43rd Avenue. Overall, Waterway Village is at the northeast corner of 58th and 49th. This aerial here shows how Pod X fits into the overall development. You can see the large wetland there just south of 53rd, and the development is ebbing out eastward from 53rd. Pod X is neatly fit into the southeast portion of the site. Proposed development. This particular pod is 71.14 acres. It totals 161 residential units. Of those, 129 are single family and 32 are villas. This is the last pod of the Waterway Village DRI. Oddly enough, the original approval was in April 14th of 2005, exactly 17 years ago to the day. Conceptual PD plan approval was granted, allowing for a total of 1,540 residential units on 696 acres in multiple stages. To date, 1,220 residential units have been granted preliminary PD plan approval. And this final this final pod brings the overall total to 1,381 units. It's an overall density of 1.98 units per acre, which is less than the 2.29 that was originally approved. The preliminary plan map shows 3 interconnected stormwater ponds, each with its own littoral shelf. A traffic circulation plan, the roads are in a basic circular pattern, allowing each lot to have access off an internal roadway. There's a full movement driveway connection at 43rd Avenue and an internal road connection at the north at Pod V. Dedication improvements and conditions, there are going to be sidewalks on both sides of the internal roadways with a connection to the existing sidewalk network on 43rd Avenue. Street lights have been placed intermittently throughout the subdivision to provide ample lighting. There are no off-site improvements within this pod. They've already been completed through other phases of development within Waterway. Namely, the major improvements that they were required to do was some intersection capacity improvements at 58 and 60. Those were completed years ago. Environmental issues. There's no current environmental issues with this pod. There were previously wetland issues that were addressed through a preserve area management plan. That plan has been implemented, has been maintained and monitored, and it is to this day. There is a 20-acre upland preservation tract on the east side of Pod X. They are keeping that, or putting that preservation in there for 2 reasons. One, for open space, and to provide a buffer between this development and county services and complexes to the east. This slide brings you the landscape plan. You'll see there's a type B buffer with a 6-foot landscape berm as proposed along 43rd Avenue and 49th Street. They're going to be planting street trees throughout the subdivision to create a boulevard effect. A very nice tree-lined road. You'll see the 21-acre upland preserve to the east of the site. And then there's an existing 3.47-acre wetland to the north that was preserved as part of Pod V. It's being maintained. Staff recommendation is to grant, for the PZZ, to grant preliminary PD plan approval for the preserve at Waterway Village Phase 2, Pod X, subject to the following conditions. Approval of a detailed landscape plan must be obtained prior to issuance of the land development permit. Prior to issuance of a certificate of completion, perimeter buffers adjacent to the area of development must be completed, and all sidewalks adjacent to common areas must be installed. Be happy to answer any questions the commission may have. The applicants are in attendance.
Does any commissioner have any questions for staff? I have, I'm sorry.
I will ask
Go ahead.
my usual question, and it may be on here, but when I turn 40, I'm going to need glasses. The lot width, I know there's something, there's varying lot widths, but what would the smallest lot width be?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, Ryan Sweeney, Chief of Current Development. I don't know that off the top of my head, but I will start by saying there's 2 product types, a single-family lot and then a villas lot. So a villas is essentially a 2-unit attached with a lot line through the middle. So that would be, of course, the more narrow of the 2, but that's not really a conventional single-family. If you bear with me 1 second. And again, the applicant is here. He probably knows off the top of his head, but I believe, I want to say it's 40 feet is the lot width per the approved PD.
And is that the minimum in the county?
No, that's through the PD process. The typical minimum for, like, say, an RS6 is 70. But this through the Waterway Village PD process, they were approved for narrower lot widths and reduced side setbacks. But one thing as a result of that is you get much more common open space like the 21-acre preserve. So they kind of clustered, even within this pod, they cluster the development to the west 2/3 of the pod.
And like you always tell me, it's much more affordable.
I don't know that that's necessarily the case right now, but yes, it's a more affordable type of development pattern, correct?
Okay, thank you.
Ryan, I missed 1 or 2 meetings in March. and that may have been when you discussed it, but do you have even an approximation as to the units that were approved, residential units approved in the past year, 2021? Approximately what percent were not conventional,
Sure.
mentioned lots?
I have all of those numbers sitting on my desk back in my office. Well, but yeah, I could, but ballpark. I mean, you do ask this question quite a bit. I would say in the past year in single family, it's probably about 70% of the development is PD, whereas 30% is conventional lots.
I'm sorry, 70%?
Is PD, is planned development, and about 30% is conventional. Multifamily, almost 100% of it is just site plan, straightforward. So that, I think that answers your question. And units wise, in 2021, with absent Venetian Grove, which was a big project, it was probably about 1,000 units, and then add on Venetian, that's another 900 units itself.
That were what now?
Plat over site plan, so that was kind of a hybrid.
If you add in either condominiums or apartments,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we must be getting to a very small percentage, actually, which is being developed in accordance with conventional zoning requirements.
No. I disagree. Most of the multifamily, not condos on ownership thing, but almost all the multifamily is conventional site plan. In fact, there's only one multifamily PD that we did in the past year. Most of that is just conventional site plan.
Okay.
It's the single family that is typically PD.
Mr. Chairman, I have one more.
Yes.
In a lot of these things, the drainage takes up, or the retention ponds take up half of the acreage, and this looks much smaller than what we've seen in the past. And the reason they were so big in the past, the explanation I was given, is because for some reason, which I still don't understand, but you're not allowed to import fill. Is fill allowed to be imported in this?
Right. So, thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Mutcher. Yeah, in a lot of the projects that we saw probably over the past year, they were in the floodplain, which requires what we call the cut and fill balance. That causes those stormwater ponds to get much bigger and take up a lot of the room. This particular pod, the lakes look smaller, but it's part of a larger master system. This aerial isn't really reflective because it's much older, but there's a lot of stormwater in the overall Waterway Village development. Mm-hmm. But Waterway was not in the floodplain, therefore it didn't require the cut and fill.
And it doesn't mean that the lots don't need to be elevated or.
Correct. Yeah, there's still fill, and there's plenty of fill, quite frankly, and there's the stormwater is all accounted for. It's just not an overabundance of stormwater like you see in a lot of the South County projects we saw.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from commissioners? I have a couple of questions,
Go ahead.
Brian. The memo says that the traffic improvements are based on a traffic impact analysis, which was reviewed and approved at the time of the initial project approval, which I assume goes back to 2004 or 2005.
As revised, there was a couple updates over the years, just to be clear. And it's
My question basically was, do you think that traffic impact analysis is essentially consistent with existing conditions today? Or are you concerned that by the passage of time, things have changed and these improvements may not be sufficient?
right. So, well, the first thing I hang my hat on, and again, I don't want to call out Rich, but Rich, the Public Works Director, happens to be here tonight for the second item, so he can chime in if need be. But the first thing we'll hang our hat on is, as Patrick mentioned, is ultimately we ended up being 200. Well, let's see here. Yeah, just about 160, and my mental math's not doing great, but about 200 units short of what the original approval was. So right out of the gates, I mean, that's roughly 160 units is 1,600 trips daily. So that's a considerable decrease. So That all being said, I think with the boulevarding of 53rd and 43rd and the grid work that we've maintained, the intersections, I think it operates as expected.
Okay, so you're comfortable that the traffic improvements will handle this additional load?
Oh, yeah, 53rd Street itself it accounts for this project and 10 times over.
What's going on at 53rd Street, up at, 53rd Street and 58th Avenue?
That's the widening of 58th.
Okay, that's something the county's doing?
In
Opposed-
conjunction with a lot of what Pulte contributed to years ago.
Okay,
And 43rd didn't exist.
Correct,
then.
correct. It stopped at 49th Street, and now it goes all the way through to 50th.
Was 43rd envisioned in this traffic study, do you know?
Yeah, absolutely, yes, yes.
Oh, They,
That's a thoroughfare
Figured
plan
it
road.
would
that-
be
yeah,
built.
absolutely. It's a county road, yeah.
Item 9 in the staff memo talks about parking and says minimum required 2 spaces per residence. Where are those spaces located?
Primarily garage and driveway spaces. I mean, this is single family.
Each house is going to have a driveway and a garage?
Correct.
You know if the garages will be two
Two-car,
car?
correct.
Okay.
The villa may have a single car, but I'm pretty sure it's all two car.
Okay. Anything else from the commissioners? Anything else from staff?
Other than the applicant is here as well, if they want to weigh in on anything. I think we've answered your questions, but he'd be happy to chime in as well.
And would the applicant like to make a presentation?
Not a presentation, but the applicant would like to just say a few words.
You could give us your name and address.
Sure. Daniel Sorrow with the land planning firm of Kotler and Hearing, chairman, members of the Planning and Zoning Commission. Patrick and Ryan, thank you for the presentation. Really don't have much to add to staff's presentation, but would like to say that my office has been involved with this project for the last 15 years. I've been on this project for the last 10 years. It's been a fantastic project. Buzz DeVosta brought this project to the county back in 2005. One of only 2 DRIs. You've got Point West and Waterway Village. This is the last pod of the development. The developer has fulfilled all the obligations off-site and on-site. It's been mentioned that we've had off-site considerations to the Gifford community. So we've participated in some of those improvements to the Aquatic Center and the Giffords facility. We've constructed roads. We've paid our impact fees. And really, this is one of the more successful developments that Pulte has had, especially here in Indian River County. So we're excited with the full build out. We're excited with this being our last pod. The question about what size our villas are, they are 37.5 per lot. So that's 2 buildings at a 75-foot wide lot size for both of them. And as Mr. Sweeney mentioned, we are a little bit less than the overall build out as it was entitled. Back when the DRI days were here in the Treasure Coast and in the state of Florida, this was one of those. So there are existing entitlements, there are existing approvals in place for this type of project. That the preserve area was already predetermined when we were given our development order by Indian River County. The traffic was already predetermined, so those thresholds were already kind of preset. That's why we've been coming in here over the last 15 years or so with these development pods, this being the last one, with that kind of master entitlement for the overall site. As long as you come in underneath those original approvals, it's really something that the state did preemptively back in the early 2000s to set up these kinds of projects for success. So we're happy to be here. We've got a couple other Pulte projects that we're introducing shortly to Indian River County, and the staff has been great to work with. The commissions have been great to work with, and we just really appreciate your support over the years and ask for your support again this evening. Thank you.
Quick question. The preserve area, do you plan any type of recreational facilities there, for example, walking trails or anything like that?
Well, two things. One, we're going to enhance the preserve area, so we're going to remove all the exotics and replant with some natives. So that's one thing that we're doing. And the passive rec, that's the only thing we're really allowed to do, are some walking trails through the preserve area.
And they do have a very active amenity package that's shared between Pod B and Pod X. That's more of your conventional clubhouse, pool, tennis courts, pickleball courts, things of that nature.
Okay.
The applicant mentioned only 2 DRIs, and those were Point West and Waterway. Where does Grand Harbor fit into that? Was that pre-DRI
It was
days?
probably pre-DRI. No, it was a DRI. Yeah. Oh, okay, 3. And technically, the mall was a non-residential DRI, but so close. But the ones he's aware of, right?
Okay, we're up to 4.
Yeah,
Are there any others?
These are the 2 big residential DRIs, and Grand Harbor was sort of the first.
Right.
No, and the DRIs are now pretty much gone now. A lot has changed in the past 15 years.
Right.
Anything else from the applicant?
No, thank you very much.
Any other questions for the applicant?
Yes, I do, if you don't mind.
Yes, Jim.
Just a question for the applicant, is regarding the difference in the units that were approved, how did that come about as far as changing some of the multifamily to single-family, and how does that affect as far as traffic and so forth?
So we were given 1,540 units overall to stay under. Really, it's market-driven. There is no multifamily on the site. It's all a paired villa or what we call a typical single-family standalone lot. And those vary from 40-foot lots to 50-foot lots. We've got a few 60-foot lots. Everyone wants a little bit of different things. You know, we have a lot of new residents coming to Indian River County that don't want to maintain their yards. They want it to be small, but doesn't mean that it can't be nice, right? So they want, you know, maybe a 40-foot lot with a 30-foot chassis house. Some of our young families, or even you know, what we call active adult families, they perhaps would want a 60-foot lot with a 50-foot chassis house, a little bit larger of a product to have, you know, more family, more guests, more residents in the house. So Pulte, along with a lot of other builders such as Toll Brothers, you know, they try to offer what people want, and having a range of product type is really what's going to appeal to all generations.
My old math sounds like a 40-foot lot with a 30-foot footprint is only a 5-foot setback.
That's correct.
And that's
Correct. Yeah, so 5 foot,
allowed as well?
5 foot side, 10 foot between the homes. That's essentially the minimum, and it goes up from there.
I would hope so.
Yeah.
Chairman Moocher, you know, back to one of your original questions, I think Ryan, Mr. Sweeney said, you know, 70% of the units coming in are PDs. And that's because, you know, the typical lot size in Indian River County, I think, is 80 feet wide, which is a big lot, right? It's a large lot. We're finding that a lot of buyers today don't want to maintain that big of a yard, and they don't really want that much space. They'd rather have smaller yards. Most people spend most of their time inside the house, and they want less to maintain. So you know, the builders are kind of adapting to that model of having the smaller lots. So you have to kind of go to a PD if you're not going to do that minimum lot size.
And on this layout, is there room for a pool?
There is. Yep.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
On all the lots, or just,
Would say
All the lots, even the villas, can have a small pool.
oh, really?
More like a
They call that a hot tub. Yeah.
Anything else?
no, sir.
Any other questions from the commissioners? Okay. Anything further from staff?
I don't believe so. Thanks.
Anybody else like to be heard on this matter? If not, we'll go ahead and close the quasi-judicial hearing. Members of the commission?
A motion to approve with staff recommendations.
And, I'm sorry, was that a second, Mr. Landers? Okay, we have a motion and a second. Do we have any discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor, please signify by aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, that motion carries unanimously. Okay, we'll move to item 5A on the agenda, which is a public hearing. It's consideration of a proposed land development regulation amendment to section 930.07 to require new manufactured homes within the flood hazard area, coastal high hazard areas, or coastal A zones to be elevated 1 foot above base flood elevation. It is a legislative matter. Mr. Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, for the record, Ryan Sweeney, Chief of Current Development. When we do have Rich Spurka, the Public Works Director here, that will probably weigh in on any technical items. But two things. One, I guess let me introduce, and then we will need to open the actual public hearing. But a few months back, actually toward the end of last year, you may recall that we did advertise for a much larger set of changes to the stormwater LDRs that was postponed several times and then ultimately was pulled. This is not that. This is a much more narrowly defined LDR change specific to the county's National Flood Insurance Program participation in the Community Rating System, the CRS. You have to maintain certain stormwater rules and requirements in order to participate in that program, which in turn results in reductions or discounts in the flood insurance premiums throughout the county. So the better your flood ordinances are, the more discounts the residents get to enjoy, and it's on a class rating system. So this is an item that was identified that needs to be done by, we do an annual audit from the National Flood Insurance Program staff that this is an item that was identified that needs to be changed in order to maintain our current rating and always try to work towards a better class rating. So effectively what this does is it makes a very minor change in our existing stormwater ordinance, specifically chapter 930.07, and it's specific to mobile homes within essentially any flood area, floodplain, flood zone, and it requires that the manufactured home be a minimum of 1 foot above base flood, as opposed to 36 inches above grade. So it's a more technical requirement. It doesn't necessarily, Rich can correct me if I'm wrong, it doesn't necessarily push the mobile home higher, but it's a more recognized and uniform requirement. Beyond that, I will defer any technical questions to Rich as needed.
Mr. Chairman, I don't think this is a technical question, but
Sure.
you seem to use mobile home and manufactured home interchangeably.
Correct. Yes. So just to clear, mobile home is what most people colloquially refer to as a trailer. It's a HUD house. It's licensed through the Department of Housing and Urban Development, not a modular home or a home that is built on and placed on a slab that meets Florida building code. So this is mostly your trailers, for lack of a better term, is a mobile home.
Okay, well, it wasn't being, that's kind of a pejorative these days.
There's so many terms these days.
Manufactured homeowners.
Right. Yeah, well,
don't
it
like
sounds nicer.
trailers.
Sure.
But I was going to ask specifically about the modular, and that's considered
That's treated like a regular correct.
stick or even a stucco home.
It's exactly. It is a modular home that's designed, engineered to meet Florida building code. Although it might look more like a mobile home, is considered to be a single-family home, just the same as a stick-built or a block home.
Thank you.
Any other questions from commissioners?
Yes, I do.
Mr. Landers.
Regarding the 1 foot requirement, way back when, I remember discussions for the county that for the single families, you had to be a certain level above floodplain as well. Was that 1 foot or was that 6 inches?
It's either 1 foot or 18 inches of freeboard for single family, but this is not changing that requirement.
Understood. I just wanted to make sure if we were consistent in that respect. And it also shows machinery and equipment, so air conditioning units, whatever the case may be.
Everything, the lowest horizontal structure is where the point is measured from. Everything must be above that.
Okay, and then it's showing that it must adopt and enforce, so what about the existing units that
I,
are not?
I believe that's only would be through a replacement. I don't think, we're not going to retroactively go and force everybody to
That's what
elevate.
I'm asking the question.
Correct.
Okay, and that would allow them to obtain the flood insurance.
Under their current,
that,
correct.
The single-family stick-built would be as well, which is becoming a major issue throughout the county right now.
Understood.
For the substantial increases for everybody. Okay, and then that's it for now.
Okay.
Any other questions from commissioners? I just have a couple of quick questions. What is base flood elevation?
Base flood elevation is an elevation that is established based on a modeling. So, for example, if your grade, say, is at 4 feet above sea level, but the base flood elevation when the flood comes in is 5 feet, that's your base. And then you have to be a full foot above that. So it's established through FEMA, through the flood zone maps. They establish a base flood for all areas in any of these zones. And that's kind of your fixed point. So it could be above or below grade.
Do we currently have base flood elevations for all of our flood zones in Indian River?
For everything that, except for there's a small amount of area that's in dispute between FEMA and some of the regulators. But yes, by and large, the county is mapped through the FEMA layers with base flood.
Okay. So I was a little bit confused. The first page of the memo talked about where base flood elevations have been determined.
Correct.
And then the next paragraph talks about where the base flood elevation is not available. And then it says the new requirement requires that the base flood elevation be established.
Right, so not to cut you off, I'm sorry, but under the sort of the pretty old language, it was just 36 inches above grade. But base flood might be 48 inches above grade, so you're a foot below base flood. And conversely, base flood might only be 6 inches above grade, and you still have to be 2.5 feet. So it was kind of a just, hey, you're 3 feet above the ground, period. And that was not based on a modeling. So the BFEs are established now, so it's a much more defined height.
From the county standpoint, once we change this ordinance, at least we from the county do have an established baseline, which is that
Correct.
base flood elevation, which has been determined through the modeling done by FEMA.
Correct, and then it gets scaled in. So the modeling is sort of a county or a sub-county regional scale. That gets scaled in by surveyors down to, I mean, you could have half your lot in a BFE of 6 and half your lot in a BFE of 5, but it gets down to the specifics. So, yeah, it's a much more, it's just based on modeling and how much better our data has gotten, that it's just not an arbitrary, hey, you shall be 3 feet above grade, period.
Is any significant portion of these new requirements, to what extent would they apply west of US 1?
Not much.
Yeah.
Only where there might be a creek or something like that, but not a lot. And I think to your point, this probably isn't going to have much of a bearing. There's not a ton of mobile homes, certainly not on the island, but even really close to the river. I mean, there's some existing parks, but once you get west of US 1, again, Rich can smack me in the back of the head if I'm completely off base, but unless you're by the Sebastian River, river basin or something like that, you're not going to get a huge effect on this.
I would just add a comment. That my understanding of the NFIP's community rating system is that while this LDR would only apply to new manufactured homes, the benefits would entail to everybody in that community rating system, which can go
right. So the whole point, yes, it's
anything we can do to help insurance
yes,
premiums.
Exactly. Yeah. The discount is spread to all policyholders. So this may hopefully will only affect a very few, but the discount will be applied to all the policyholders, or in this case, maintained.
And I see the language that the county has achieved a rating of class 6.
Correct. It's a reverse order, so 10 being the worst, 1 being the best.
Great, yeah. Out of curiosity, I mean, are there things we could be doing to try to improve the class so our residents would get a lower insurance rate?
Once you get into the I mean, there's very few communities that are in below where we're at. It gets to be substantially more regulatory and probably not cost effective at that point.
Mr. Chairman, Phil Mattson, Community Development Director. In a moment, it'll be Rich Spurka time, but he's actually doing quite a bit to try to get that rating 5, and we may qualify. But just a few statistics real quick. I went to a Florida American Planning Association conference in Miami last summer, and I went into a seminar on the CRS. And it's shocking, but, probably less than half the jurisdictions who are eligible to participate don't. So they don't automatically rate every jurisdiction. You have to apply for it. It really is a lot of work on staff and a lot of burden, but definitely well worth it here. And to Public Works' credit, they do a really good job of applying and getting us rated. Only 251 jurisdictions in Florida, cities and counties, can be rated, have even bothered to get rated. And nationwide, only 47% are Class 7 or better. So half the jurisdictions that can try it don't even bother. Then half, again, don't get the same rating that we do. So we're doing pretty well on it. And then, Rich, I don't know if you want to add anything on Class 5? Okay. But, yeah, hopefully we'll have some good news on that someday.
Very good. Thank you. Any other questions?
Yes, how do you, this new 1 foot requirement, how is that achieved? Is it like just under the skirt, or?
Right, so what would happen is, if a mobile home was, or manufactured mobile home was gonna be located on a lot that's either wholly or partially within the floodplain, like I said, the surveyor will prepare and scale in the base flood elevation. Just for round numbers, let's say the entire lot is at BFE 5, base flood elevation 5. The drawings for the modular home will have to show that, again, the lowest horizontal structural member of the modular home, basically the chassis, if you will, has to be at a minimum of 6 feet. They can go higher, of course, but that's reviewed on a permit-by-permit basis. So it's down to every single time it gets checked.
Okay, and then I understand how the manufactured home would be brought up to that level, but what about carports and screen porches?
Those are not habitable structures.
Oh.
Again, I think it was Chip that pointed out, mechanical equipment, HVAC, it's oftentimes either set on a separate platform or it's cantilevered on the side of the unit. And any sort of electrical below would, again, have to be above that minimum elevation. But carports, driveways, sheds, those are not really considered to be habitable portion of the structure.
Habitable, okay.
A question regarding the base flood elevation. Previously, it was just 36 inches above grade.
Mm-hmm.
No survey would have been, or no flood cert would have been required then, would it have? Like it is for a single-family home? So now, wouldn't they have to do a flood certification document along with the survey?
Richard can answer that one. Are you talking about elevation certificate? Yeah.
Yeah, and Rich Barrett, Public Works Director. I turned off the mic. That's okay.
He's loud enough.
Yes, anybody who's building in a floodplain has to do a floodplain certification of the elevations of the structure, whatever it is, whether it's single-family home, mobile home, manufactured home, whatever. That's a requirement as part of our CRS program. It's a requirement of FEMA and the state.
But previously, if it was, they wouldn't have had to have done it if they just had to be 36 inches above?
They would still have to have this done. It was just a question of 36 inches above the ground instead of it's still a requirement. They'd have to show that they were above the base flood elevation.
Okay.
The thing with the 36 inches is they were stuck with that. And we were seeing them jacked up 2-3 feet higher. So this is actually a good thing. It's going to save costs for jacking up the mobile homes by be able to adjust it based on the base flood elevation, not some arbitrary 36-inch requirement.
Well, that was a concern, just the additional cost, but you're saying that's not the case. And having worked with builders that the single family, well, you now have to be 3 foot above Sebastian Highlands, and your neighbor is a foot above, and then the neighbor's not real happy, but what do you do? Yeah. Okay, thank you.
What, how do you define being in the floodplain? Is that anything that's not an X? Or
Essentially, yes. Yeah, there's a multitude of different flood layers, A, E, V, VE, but essentially anything that's not an X is considered to be some type of. Correct. So X, you're free and clear, which is a large portion of the county, especially the inland portion. But the minute you get into some, and again, Rich, correct me if I'm wrong, but you could have just the very corner of your lot is in the AE, and where you're actually building is in the X, but you're considered to be at least tangentially there.
Well,
So we have to go
even
through
though the building, the structure.
Right. So we would have to confirm at least that you're not affecting that.
So in real life, with Fairlane Harbor, I mean, where does that put them from existing to what would have to happen?
From what I know about Fairline Harbor, they're probably fine because they were, if they're under the new code or the old code, they're probably higher than they need to be with the new code by a little bit. I'm not gonna say by 2 feet,
Okay.
but I'll bet you they're a foot higher than they need to be. Again, Fairline Harbor, from what I know about that, they dumped some fill in there before they built. And I don't think they're that much into the floodplain. But this would probably keep the mobile homes a little bit lower than they are now because of the new criteria.
The newest ones in there, the newest one is on stilts.
Yeah, a lot of them are going to the two-story levels, but I just know from the hurricane times what was going on in there.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Anything else you'd like to add? No, sir. Anybody else like to be heard on this matter?
This is a public hearing, so I don't know
Oh, yeah.
if we ever actually officially.
Yeah, we actually never officially opened the public hearing. That's what happens when you get a share of the day. So we will consider the public hearing to have opened when staff started its presentation. And before we close the public hearing, would anybody else like to be heard on this matter? If not, we'll go ahead and close the public hearing. Any discussion or motions from staff? Excuse me, from commissioners? Or could we have a motion, either to approve or
I'll move
not?
to approve.
Okay, we've got a motion to approve staff's recommendation. Do we have a second?
Second.
Mr. Stewart made the motion, Mr. Landers made the second. Any discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor, please signify by aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, that motion carries unanimously. Thank you, sir. Next item is item 6, Commissioners' Matters. Does any commissioner have any matter? None. We'll move to item 7, Planning Matters. Mr. Sweeney?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The only item I have to add is that we will certainly hope to have a April 28th meeting. We've already advertised for a public hearing, and in fact, there's probably at least 2 public hearings and probably 2 or 3 other projects. It's going to be a pretty full agenda, so I'm hoping we'll have at least 4, if not more, members present for that meeting. That's the 4th Thursday of the month.
Item 8, any attorneys' matters?
No, sir.
Hearing nothing further, we'll go ahead and adjourn the meeting. Thank you all.